On a silent Christmas Eve in a small Montana town, the snow was falling so softly it erased every sound. Officer Samuel Crowley thought it was just another quiet night, his last winter shift, his last patrol before retirement. Then he heard something that did not belong to the storm, a weak sound, fragile, almost gone. Inside a frozen truck, time was running out for a life no one was looking for. This is not just a story about a rescue. It is a story about staying when walking away would have been easier. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you are watching from tonight. And if stories of hope, kindness, and second chances matter to you, please subscribe to our channel and walk this journey with us. Winter arrived in Hollow Creek, Montana, not with drama, but with certainty. Snow fell in long, disciplined lines, quiet and persistent, covering streets, roofs, and memories alike. The town was small, just over 3,000 souls tucked between pine-covered hills and a river that froze every December without complaint. On Christmas Eve, Hollow Creek usually carried a gentle defiance against the dark. Porch lights glowed amber, evergreen wreaths hung crookedly on doors, and the old church at the center of town rehearsed its bells as if reminding heaven not to forget them. This year, however, the cold arrived heavier, the kind of cold that did not threaten, but promised. Officer Samuel Crowley, 64 years old, sat alone in his patrol truck near the closed hardware store on Main Street. He was a tall man who had slowly learned to stand with a slight forward lean, not from weakness, but from decades of listening to people who needed help, to confessions spoken too late, to radio static that often carried worse news than silence. His hair was silver now, cut short out of habit, and his face bore the geography of a life lived outdoors. Weathered skin, lines carved deep around the eyes, and a mouth that rested naturally in a thoughtful, almost apologetic expression. Samuel had never been a loud man. His authority came from steadiness, from showing up even when the outcome was already written. This was his final winter shift. One more night before retirement papers became more than ink and turned into absence. His coffee sat untouched in the cup holder, steam curling upward like a reminder of warmth he had not yet decided to accept. For most of his life, work had been his structure. After his wife passed 12 years earlier, an illness that arrived quietly and left no space for negotiation, Samuel learned to fill the silence with duty. The town knew him as reliable, patient, sometimes stern, but never unkind. Children trusted him instinctively. Adults trusted him because he never pretended to know more than he did. What few people knew was that Samuel carried a particular fear, not of danger, but of moments when he might choose inaction because it was easier. The snow thickened, softening the edges of the world, muting tires and footsteps alike. Then Samuel heard it. At first he thought it was the wind slipping through a loose sign or the low groan of metal contracting in the cold. But the sound returned, thin, uneven, fragile. It did not belong to the storm. It did not belong to machinery. And it certainly did not belong to any human voice he had ever heard. Samuel opened the truck door and stepped into the cold. His boots sank into fresh powder. The sound of his movement swallowed immediately. The noise came again, faint but deliberate, as though something was trying to remember how to ask. Samuel followed it past a row of parked vehicles buried to their doors, toward an old pickup truck half consumed by drifting snow. The vehicle sat crookedly, one tire sunken deep into ice, its paint dulled by years of neglect. No holiday lights, no recent tracks. He wiped frost from the passenger side window with his gloved hand. Inside the cab, barely visible through clouded glass, was a German shepherd puppy. She could not have been more than 4 months old. Her coat was thick but unkempt, black and tan dulled by cold and condensation. Her body was curled tightly into itself, spine bent protectively, as if trying to become smaller than the winter. Her chest shuddered with shallow breaths, each exhale leaving a faint bloom on the glass that vanished almost immediately. Her ears, too large for her head, still awkward with youth, lay flat, not in fear, but in exhaustion. The puppy's eyes were open, dark, glassy, alert in a way that betrayed both intelligence and desperation. She was alive, but only just. Samuel circled the truck. The hood was buried, engine cold, no plates on the rear, no footprints nearby except his own. Whoever had driven this truck had left her there, either believing she would be found or not caring whether she would be. Samuel had seen abandonment before, animals tied to fences, boxes left near dumpsters. But something about this felt different. This was not carelessness. This was surrender. The puppy shifted slightly when Samuel leaned closer. Her head lifted with visible effort. One paw slid forward and pressed against the glass, clumsy and slow, as though even that small gesture demanded more strength than she had left. Her breathing caught briefly, then resumed in shallow bursts. Samuel felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the one that arrived just before memory. He remembered a winter decades earlier, a call that came too late, a man found frozen less than a mile from shelter. Samuel had followed protocol that night. He had waited. He had done everything by the book. The book had not saved anyone. He keyed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Crowley. I have an animal emergency. Juvenile canine, German shepherd. Vehicle disabled, likely abandoned overnight. Severe exposure." His voice remained calm, professional, but his eyes never left the puppy. Protocol would require waiting for animal control or additional authorization, unless life was in immediate danger. Samuel already knew the answer. The puppy's breathing stuttered again, just once, like a skipped step. Her eyes locked onto his. There was no panic in them, only focus. Samuel stepped back, snow crunching softly beneath his boots. He assessed the truck, the angles, the distance between glass and fragile body. He chose the rear window, farthest from where the puppy lay curled. His hands did not shake. Experience had taught him that hesitation could be louder than fear. Winter pressed in around them, patient and confident. The town behind him slept, unaware. Somewhere deep in his chest, Samuel recognized the sound he had heard when he first stepped out of the truck. It was not a cry. It was not a plea. It was the sound made in the brief space before a decision either matters or never will. He raised his arm. The snow did not hurry. It never did. It fell with the calm assurance of something that believed time belonged to it alone. Officer Samuel Crowley stood beside the old pickup truck, the cold creeping steadily through the seams of his uniform, settling into his bones with intimate familiarity. He had lived in Montana long enough to understand that winter was not cruel, it was indifferent. And indifference, Samuel knew, was often more dangerous than malice. The puppy inside the cab shifted again, her movement small and uncertain. Her paw slid down the fogged glass, leaving a faint trail before dropping back against her chest. Samuel exhaled slowly, the sound fogging the air in front of him. He had already made the decision, though he allowed himself the courtesy of naming it. Life before protocol. He adjusted his stance, placing his feet firmly in the snow. His right arm rose, baton angled carefully. Samuel was not a reckless man. He had spent 4 decades weighing outcomes, considering consequences. He aimed for the rear passenger window, the furthest point from the puppy's fragile body. The first strike landed with a dull crack, spiderwebbing the glass but leaving it intact. The sound echoed briefly before being swallowed by snowfall. Inside the cab, the puppy flinched, her head lifted, ears twitching weakly. Her eyes searched the world beyond the glass, unfocused but determined. Samuel struck again. The crack widened. Ice crystals spilled from the fractured edge. On the third blow, the glass gave way, collapsing inward with a sharp, final sound. Shards scattered across the seat and floor, glittering briefly before disappearing beneath frost and shadow. Cold air rushed into the cab, immediate and invasive, but it carried something else with it too. Relief. The puppy sagged, her body yielding, now that the barrier between her and the world was gone. Samuel dropped the baton and reached inside, moving slowly, deliberately, mindful of broken edges. He removed his gloves, ignoring the sting as the cold bit into his skin. His hands slid beneath the puppy's chest and hindquarters, careful not to jostle her. She weighed almost nothing, lighter than she should have been. Her body was tense, muscles trembling, but she did not resist. As Samuel lifted her free, she released a sound, soft, breathy, almost surprised. Not a cry, not a whine, just proof that she was still here. He pressed her gently against his chest, wrapping his coat around her small frame. Her heart fluttered beneath his palm, fast and uneven. "Easy," he murmured, his voice low, steady. He did not know whether she understood words, but he knew she understood tone. Animals always did. He keyed his radio again, this time with urgency threaded through his composure. Dispatch, animals secured. Juvenile canine removed from vehicle. Severe hypothermia suspected. Request immediate assistance. The voice that answered belonged to Linda Morales, the night dispatcher. Linda was, in her late 40s, a woman with a compact build and sharp eyes that missed very little. Years earlier, she had transferred off patrol after responding to a domestic call that ended badly. Not because she lacked courage, but because she had learned something about herself. She absorbed pain too deeply. As a dispatcher, she carried the town differently now, through voices and coordinates rather than broken doors. "Copy that, Sam," Linda replied, her tone calm but attentive. "Units en route. ETA 3 minutes. You want animal control notified?" "Negative," Samuel said, adjusting his grip as the puppy shivered. "I've got her stabilized for now." "Understood," Linda said after a brief pause. She trusted Samuel. Everyone did. The patrol lights arrived first, cutting red and blue through the white night. Officer Mark Delaney stepped out of the cruiser, boots crunching loudly as he approached. Mark was 32, broad-shouldered, with the restless energy of someone still proving himself. His dark hair was perpetually unkempt, and his expression shifted quickly from alert to concerned as he took in the scene. "Jesus," Mark muttered softly when he saw the shattered window and the small bundle in Samuel's arms. "How long was she in there?" "Overnight, at least," Samuel said. His voice remained even, but his jaw tightened. "We need heat, now." Mark nodded without question. He opened his cruiser and grabbed an emergency thermal blanket, silver and crinkled, the kind designed to trap what little warmth remained. Together, they wrapped the puppy, layering protection without restricting her breathing. Mark crouched beside them, his movements careful, his usual bravado replaced by quiet focus. "She's young," Mark said. "German Shepherd, right?" "Female," Samuel replied. 4 months, maybe." The puppy's eyes fluttered open again. She shifted slightly, her nose brushing against Samuel's collar. The contact was brief, accidental, but it anchored something in him he had not expected. "Ambulance?" Mark asked. "For a dog," Samuel said, almost smiling. "No, but we'll keep her warm until we can transport." They waited in silence as the snow continued its patient descent. Samuel counted the puppy's breaths, one hand resting lightly against her ribs. Each rise and fall was a small victory. He thought of the nights he had waited like this before, waiting for news, for outcomes, for things that might never arrive. He had learned that waiting was an action in itself, provided you stayed present. A passing car slowed briefly, headlights sweeping over the scene before continuing on. The town would wake tomorrow to the usual rituals of Christmas morning, unaware of how close something small had come to being lost entirely. The puppy stirred again, her head lifting just enough to rest against Samuel's chest. Her breathing steadied, though it remained shallow. Her ears twitched. At distant sounds, the hum of engines, the crackle of radio static. She was still listening, still choosing to stay. Mark glanced at Samuel, then back at the puppy. "You okay, Sam?" Samuel nodded once. "Yeah." He hesitated, then added, "Just remembering." Mark didn't ask what. Some questions were better left unanswered. When Animal Control finally radioed that they were delayed due to road conditions, Samuel made another decision. "We're transporting her ourselves," he said. "I'm not waiting." Linda's voice crackled back through the radio. "Copy. I'll log it." Samuel shifted the puppy gently, securing her in the passenger seat of his patrol truck, heater blasting on low, steady warmth. Mark followed behind as Samuel pulled back onto the snow-muted street. The old pickup truck disappeared into the falling white, already becoming part of the town's quiet inventory of forgotten things. As they drove, the puppy let out a small, uncertain sigh and settled more fully into the blanket. Samuel glanced at her briefly, then returned his eyes to the road. The law had rules, winter had patience. But tonight, time had been interrupted. The veterinary clinic sat at the edge of Hollow Creek, a low, practical building crouched against the storm, as if it had learned long ago not to challenge winter. Snow clung to its windowsills and gathered along the roofline in soft, uneven drifts. A single wreath hung on the front door, its red ribbon stiff with cold, a quiet reminder that this night belonged to something more than emergencies. Inside, The lights glowed warm and steady, cutting a narrow island of safety into the dark. Samuel Crowley carried the puppy through the doors without ceremony. His arms ached, not from the weight, but from the care required to keep her still, warm, breathing. The puppy's head lolled briefly as they crossed the threshold, then settled again against his chest, her breath fogging faintly in the warmer air. Dr. Hannah Price looked up from the reception desk the moment they entered. She was 48, with hair pulled back into a practical knot that spoke of long hours and little patience for vanity. Years earlier, she had planned to work in a large city clinic, but after losing her younger brother in a winter highway accident near Hollow Creek, she stayed. Some people left after grief, others rooted themselves more deeply. Hannah had done both at once. Her posture was calm, efficient, but her eyes sharpened immediately when she saw the puppy's condition. "Hypothermia," she said, already moving. "How long was she exposed?" "Overnight," Samuel replied. His voice was steady, but he felt the fatigue settling into his shoulders now that the adrenaline had begun to ebb. Hannah nodded once. She gestured toward the treatment room, and a veterinary technician appeared from the hallway. Emily Rhodes was 26, slim, quick-moving, with an earnestness that made her apologize to animals even when they bit her. She had grown up on a ranch just outside town, and still smelled faintly of hay no matter how many times she washed her hands. "Warm IV fluids," Hannah said. "Oxygen, slowly." Emily took the puppy gently, her movements practiced, her touch reassuring. The puppy did not resist. She barely reacted at all, which worried Samuel more than panic would have. As they placed her on the stainless steel table, Hannah pressed her fingers against the puppy's gums, then checked her pupils. "Severe hypothermia," Hannah said quietly. "Borderline shock. Another hour?" She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. They worked without urgency, but without waste. Heated blankets were layered carefully around the puppy's small body. An IV line slid into place, warm fluids flowing steadily. Oxygen tubing rested near her muzzle. The puppy trembled as warmth began to return, her muscles reacting in short, involuntary bursts. Samuel stood just outside the immediate workspace, hands folded in front of him, watching. He had been present for many kinds of emergencies over the years: car accidents, heart attacks, fires. But this felt different. There was no chaos here, no shouting. Only quiet competence and the slow work of undoing what cold had tried to claim. Hannah glanced at him briefly. "You can stay," she said. It was not a question. She recognized something in his posture, the way he leaned forward slightly as though proximity itself might help. Minutes stretched. The clock on the wall ticked with exaggerated clarity, each second a small declaration of survival. The puppy's breathing began to steady, shallow but regular. Her heart rate slowed marginally. Not safe, but no longer slipping away. "Do we have a name?" Emily asked softly, adjusting the blanket. "No," Samuel said. "Not yet." Hannah checked the puppy's ears, her paws, the pads cracked slightly from cold. "Female," she confirmed. "Young, shepherd mix, but mostly German shepherd." She straightened. "No collar?" "None," Samuel replied. "Microchip?" Hannah asked, already knowing the likely answer. Emily scanned. The machine beeped once, then fell silent. "Nothing." Hannah exhaled slowly. "All right." She glanced toward Samuel. "Legally, she's a stray. There's a 72-hour hold if no owner comes forward." Samuel nodded. He had known this was coming. Rules mattered. They always did, even when lives were involved, especially then. "We'll stabilize her tonight," Hannah continued. "If she maintains temperature and hydration, she'll make it through. But tonight is critical." Samuel moved closer, resting a hand lightly against the edge of the table. The puppy's eyes fluttered open briefly. They were still dark, still clouded with exhaustion, but they tracked movement now. When they landed on Samuel, something passed between them, recognition perhaps, or simply memory of warmth. Emily smiled faintly. "She likes you." Samuel did not respond. He did not trust his voice yet. Outside, the snow intensified, wind pressing against the building as though testing its resolve. The clinic generator hummed softly, a steady counterpoint to the storm. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang once, then again, practicing for midnight. Hannah removed her gloves and leaned against the counter. "If no one claims her," she said carefully, "she'll need temporary foster care during the hold period." Samuel looked up. "I can do that." The words surprised him as much as anyone else. They were not dramatic. They did not feel heroic. They felt practical, inevitable. Hannah studied him for a moment. She saw the age in his eyes, the steadiness, the quiet loneliness that had nothing to do with being alone and everything to do with having outlived the people who once shared his silence. "All right," she said finally, "but we'll see how the night goes." Christmas Eve deepened around them. Emily hung a small ornament on the corner of a cabinet, a habit she kept for luck. Hannah filled out paperwork with precise handwriting, documenting injuries, exposure time, intake conditions. Samuel sat on a chair near the wall, coat folded over his knees, watching the puppy's chest rise and fall. At one point, Hannah approached him with a cup of coffee. "You look like you haven't slept," she said. "I've slept enough," Samuel replied. It was only half true. The puppy shivered again, then settled. Her breathing evened out further. Emily adjusted the blanket and whispered something Samuel could not hear. The puppy's ear twitched in response. By the time midnight arrived, the storm outside had eased slightly, snow falling now, in slower, heavier flakes. The clinic was quiet except for machines and the soft murmur of human voices. "She's stable," Hannah said at last. "Not out of danger, but stable." Samuel closed his eyes briefly. He did not pray, not in words, but he acknowledged the moment the way he always did, by staying. Christmas Eve passed without carols or candles for him. There were no gifts exchanged, no toasts made. But when the puppy's breathing deepened into something resembling sleep, Samuel felt a shift inside himself, subtle but unmistakable. He had come to the clinic to save a life. What he did not yet know was that something in him had already begun to thaw. Samuel Crowley's house stood on the quieter side of Hollow Creek, just beyond the last bend where streetlights thinned and pine trees took over the sky. It was a modest, single-story home with weathered siding and a porch that faced east, catching the first pale light of morning. Snow rested heavily along the railing and steps, undisturbed, as though the house itself had learned to wait. For years, it had done exactly that. The drive back from the clinic passed in silence, broken only by the soft hum of the heater and the steady rhythm of tires on packed snow. The puppy lay bundled on the passenger seat, wrapped in blankets that smelled faintly of disinfectant and wool. Her breathing was slow now, measured, each rise of her chest a fragile agreement to continue. Samuel drove carefully, hands steady on the wheel, glancing toward her more often than the road ahead. Inside the house, warmth greeted them like a memory. Samuel set the puppy down near the fireplace, layering blankets on the floor where an old rug still bore faint impressions from another time. He moved deliberately, turning on lamps one by one, as if light itself needed to be reintroduced gently. The house responded with small sounds, the creak of floorboards, the low tick of pipes warming, noises that felt less like interruption and more like acknowledgement. The puppy remained still for a long moment, her body curled inward, conserving strength. She was small but not delicate, her paws already large, promising a future she did not yet know how to claim. Her coat, now dry, revealed the familiar black saddle and tan legs of a German shepherd, though dulled by fatigue. A faint scar ran along her left ear, barely noticeable, likely from an accident rather than cruelty. Her eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the new light, tracking movement with cautious curiosity. Samuel knelt beside her, lowering himself carefully, joints protesting softly. He had not knelt like this in years. Not since the last winter his wife had been able to walk on her own, when he had tied her boots and laughed at how impatient she pretended not to be. The memory came uninvited, but not unwelcome. "It's all right," he said quietly, not expecting understanding, but offering presence. His voice filled the room in a way it had not done for a long time. The puppy's ears twitched. She shifted slightly, one paw extending forward before retreating again, testing the ground as if unsure whether it would hold. She did not whimper. She did not cry. She simply watched. Samuel went to the kitchen and returned with a shallow bowl of water, placing it within reach. He added a small amount of softened food, prepared carefully, mindful of the veterinarian's instructions. He did not rush her. Some things he knew could not be hurried without being undone. Hours passed slowly. Outside, the sky lightened, clouds thinning as the storm finally loosened its grip on the town. pale sunlight filtered through the windows, settling across the floor in narrow bands. The puppy shifted again, pushing herself upright with visible effort. Her legs trembled, but she remained standing, stubbornness carrying her where strength could not. She took a few tentative steps, then another, following Samuel as he moved across the room. The sound of her claws clicking softly against the floor startled him. He stopped, turned, and watched as she approached, nose lowered, tail still. When she slipped slightly near the porch door and landed clumsily in a patch of tracked-in snow, she froze, eyes wide. Then, as if surprised by the sensation, she shook herself vigorously, sending fine powder everywhere. Samuel laughed. The sound escaped him before he could stop it, low at first, then fuller, unfamiliar in his own ears. The puppy tilted her head, confused, then took a cautious step closer. The house seemed to exhale with him. Later, as the morning grew steadier, Samuel sat on the floor beside the fireplace, back against the couch. He watched the puppy explore her immediate surroundings, nose tracing invisible paths, curiosity waking slowly. She paused often, resting, then continued. She did not stray far, always keeping him in view. Samuel thought of names without intention. Many came and went, none fitting. Naming, he had learned, was an act of faith. It assumed a future. When he finally spoke the name aloud, it surprised him. Ellen. The words settled into the room quietly. Ellen, his mother's name. A woman with gentle hands and unshakable belief in return, of seasons, of people, of lost things finding their way back. She had taught Samuel that patience was not passivity, that staying mattered even when outcomes did not favor it. The puppy lifted her head, her ears perked slightly. She looked at him, truly looked, and for the first time, her tail moved. Just once. That night, Samuel placed a blanket near his bed, close enough that he could hear her breathing without reaching for it. He lay awake for a long time, listening, not for danger, but for reassurance. Ellen shifted once, then settled, her breath deepening into steady sleep. No whimpering, no restless movement, just quiet trust. The house, long accustomed to silence, adjusted around them. The air felt different, heavier with presence, lighter with purpose. Samuel realized, as sleep finally claimed him, that the house had not been empty all these years. It had been waiting. Morning arrived gently. Sunlight spilled across the floor, warming the edges of the room. Ellen stirred, stood carefully, and padded toward him, nose brushing his hand. Samuel opened his eyes and smiled, the expression slow but genuine. Outside, Hollow Creek resumed its quiet rhythms. Inside, something old had been remembered. The second storm did not announce itself. It arrived quietly, the way exhaustion does, slipping in when vigilance begins to relax. Snow returned to Hollow Creek in softer sheets, less dramatic than before, but no less determined. The wind carried none of the earlier fury, only persistence, tapping gently at windows and doors as if asking to be let back inside. Aylin noticed it first. She had eaten little that morning, only a few careful mouthfuls before stepping away from the bowl. At first, Samuel told himself it was caution, the body's way of relearning trust. But by afternoon, her movement slowed further. The spark that had returned to her eyes dimmed, not extinguished, but turned inward, like a flame conserving itself against draft. Her ears drooped. She lay down more often, resting her chin on her paws, watching Samuel with quiet attentiveness that felt heavier than fear. Samuel watched her in return. He had learned, over the years, to read small changes, the kind that never made it into reports. Ellen's breathing remained steady, but something else had shifted. A subtle withdrawal. When she refused water at dusk, Samuel did not wait. He lifted her gently, feeling how light she still was beneath the blankets, how little reserve her body possessed. The drive back to the clinic unfolded beneath falling snow, headlights carving narrow tunnels through white. Samuel drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting near Elin, as though proximity itself might tether her to the present. Dr. Hannah Price met them at the door without surprise. She had seen this before, the way bodies, once pulled back from the edge, sometimes wavered before choosing a direction. Her movements were calm, practiced. She examined Elin carefully, checking temperature, gums, heart rate. Emily assisted quietly, her usual cheerfulness subdued by concentration. Delayed response, Hannah said at last. Her system's still catching up. Exposure like that doesn't end when the heat comes back. She looked at Samuel. Tonight is critical. The words settled heavily between them. Samuel nodded. He did not ask what critical meant. He knew. Hannah administered supportive treatment. Nothing invasive, nothing dramatic. Warmth, fluids, time. She can go home, Hannah said finally. But don't leave her alone. If anything changes, you come back immediately. Samuel did not trust himself to answer, so he nodded again. Back at the house, the storm deepened. Snow pressed softly against the windows, reshaping the world outside into something smaller, closer. Samuel built the fire higher, careful not to overheat the room. He laid Elin near the hearth, wrapped in familiar blankets, and sat beside her. Night stretched long. Samuel counted her breaths, without realizing he was doing it. Inhale, exhale, pause, continue. He spoke to her softly, not commands, not encouragement, just presence. He told her about the river thawing each spring, about the children who would one day call her name, about a house that remembered how to be full. He did not know whether she heard him, but he knew she heard something. Her ear twitched occasionally. Her eyes opened briefly, then closed again. As hours passed, memory crept in. Samuel found himself back in hospital corridors, sitting beside machines that beeped and hummed, holding hands that had grown thin and unfamiliar. He remembered promising to stay awake, to watch, to not miss the moment when something changed. He had kept that promise once. Tonight, he kept it again. Sometime after midnight, the fire dimmed. Samuel stirred, added a log, watched the flames climb. Outside, the storm softened further, snow falling now in lazy spirals. Ellen shifted, her head lifted slightly, then dropped again. Samuel leaned closer, his breath held. "Easy," he whispered. Time lost shape. It became a series of small observations. The sound of the clock, the rise and fall of Elin's chest, the wind easing against the eaves. Then, just before dawn, something changed. Elin stirred more deliberately this time. Her head lifted, not in reflex, but with intention. She licked her nose once, slowly, as though rediscovering sensation. Samuel reached for the bowl of water, offering it carefully. She drank. Not much, not quickly, but enough to signal return. Her breathing deepened. She shifted her weight, pushing herself into a more upright position. When she settled again, it was with a small sigh that sounded almost like relief. Samuel did not move for a long moment. He watched, afraid to disrupt the fragile equilibrium. When the first pale light of morning filtered through the windows, Ellen stood. Unsteady, yes, but standing. Outside, the storm broke. Clouds thinned, revealing a sky washed clean, blue peeking through the remnants of night. Samuel felt something inside him loosen. Not triumph, not certainty, but gratitude. The kind that arrives quietly and asks for nothing in return. He stayed seated on the floor as Elin took a few careful steps, then lay back down, spent but present. Samuel rested his hand near her, not touching, just close enough to matter. The night had tested them both, and for now, they had stayed. Spring arrived in Hollow Creek the way forgiveness often does, quietly, without announcement, and long after anyone had stopped asking for it. Snow retreated in thin, uneven patches, clinging stubbornly to shaded corners while the rest of the town stretched in remembered color. The river loosened its grip on ice. Pine needles darkened with moisture. Mud replaced crunch beneath boots, and the air carried the faint, hopeful smell of earth waking up. Elin grew into herself during those weeks. Her movements lengthened, confidence returning in increments rather than leaps. Her coat regained its sheen, black deepening, tan warming under the strengthening sun. She was still young, still learning the dimensions of her body, but the fragility that once defined her had loosened its hold. Her ears stood more often now, alert to birdsong and distant engines. Her eyes, always observant, softened, no longer scanning for danger in every shadow. Samuel adjusted without noticing that he was doing so. His mornings changed first. He woke earlier, not from obligation, but anticipation. Ellen waited patiently by the door, tail still, posture attentive, as though each walk were a shared assignment rather than a routine. Together they traced the same quiet routes, past the church steps where winter's grit still lingered, along the school fence where children gathered again with backpacks and laughter, down the trail behind the station where snowmelt carved new lines into familiar ground. People noticed. They waved, they asked questions, they crouched to let Ellen sniff their hands. Children spoke her name with the certainty of ownership that only affection allows. Samuel answered politely, briefly, never volunteering more than necessary. He had spent a lifetime guarding boundaries. He did not yet know which ones he was ready to lower. Paperwork arrived one afternoon in a thin envelope marked with the shelter's insignia. 72 hours had passed long ago. No owner had come forward, no claims, no questions. The law, having waited, now offered clarity. Samuel read the letter once, then folded it neatly and set it aside. The decision had already been made, though he had not spoken it aloud. Some choices did not require ceremony. They required only acknowledgement. Ellen lay nearby, head resting on her paws, eyes half closed but attentive. When Samuel stood, she rose with him, ready. She had learned his rhythms, the pauses that preceded movement, the quiet signals that said now. On his final day in uniform, the town gathered without planning it. The station doors stood open, sunlight spilling across the floor. Coffee brewed somewhere. Laughter drifted in from the hall. Samuel dressed carefully the morning, smoothing the creases in his uniform with deliberate attention. He fastened his badge last, fingers lingering briefly over its worn surface. Elin sat nearby, calm and steady, her tail resting lightly against his boot. Officer Mark Delaney stopped short when he saw them. "Guess the rumors were true," he said with a grin softened by respect. Samuel smiled. "Guess so." The ceremony was brief. Words were spoken, kind ones, generous ones. Stories shared, thanks offered. Samuel listened, nodding, accepting the moment without trying to own it. When it ended, he stepped outside with Elin at his side. The sun was warm enough now to be trusted. Someone joked that he'd found a partner who would never retire. Samuel laughed, not loudly, but fully. Later, alone again, he returned home. The house met them differently now. It no longer waited. It participated. Ellen moved through it with familiarity, claiming corners and light patches, resting where warmth pooled naturally. Samuel sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug that had long since gone cold, and considered the quiet. It was not the same quiet he had known before. This one breathed. In the afternoon, he opened the door and let the breeze in. Ellen stepped onto the porch, nose lifted, ears twitching at distant sounds. She glanced back once, checking in, then returned her attention to the world. Samuel watched her, recognizing the balance she had found, curiosity without fear, independence without distance. That evening, as dusk softened the edges of the day, Samuel sat on the porch steps. Ellen settled beside him, close enough that her warmth was unmistakable. The sky turned the pale blue of beginnings. Somewhere, a bell rang, not for ceremony, just habit. Samuel thought of winter, of a sound that had not belonged to snow, of a moment when walking away would have been easier, cleaner, permitted. He understood now that rescue was rarely the dramatic act itself. It was the staying after, the choosing again, each day, without guarantee. Ellen shifted, resting her head briefly against his knee. Samuel placed his hand on her neck, feeling the steady pulse beneath his fingers. Neither moved. There was nothing left to decide. Some rescues announce themselves with noise and urgency. Others leave no trace at all. They simply alter the shape of what remains. Winter had tried to keep something that night. It did not succeed. Sometimes the greatest miracles do not come with thunder or light from the sky. Sometimes they come quietly, through a choice to stop, a choice to listen, a choice to stay. In this story, Winter tried to take something small and unseen, but God placed the right heart in the right place at the right moment, not because that man was perfect, but because he was willing. In our daily lives, we often believe miracles belong to the past or to others. Yet every day, God places moments before us where love can act through our hands. A neighbor who needs patience, a stranger who needs kindness, a life that needs one more chance. When we choose compassion instead of comfort, we become part of the miracle. Not loud miracles, but lasting ones. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need hope today. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from. If you believe in the power of kindness and second chances, write Amen in the comments. May God bless you and your family. May He protect those who feel alone tonight. And may He remind us all that love is never wasted. Please support our YouTube channel by subscribing and staying with us for more stories of faith, hope, and humanity. Your support helps us continue sharing these messages with the world.